Good
I have
night, McClean.
good night, Marcia. Um, I have to try to match you, after all.
No, not at all. Not at all. You know, you're always together.
All right. But thanks a lot. And I really look forward to hearing what the Supreme Court would say. I note with amazement the suggestion that CBC might ban classic sound. I've heard it on VOB, I've heard it played, I've listened to the lyrics. And as you were speaking, I said to myself, if they substituted D instead of B, it would be
Exactly.
played at every rotation, and it is unfortunate because we're sending contradictions, but I am not going to delay. This is another, what I'm going to talk about perhaps is what I see as another contradiction. And I note with interest that we've had some information shared about the sugar industry, an industry that is critical to Barbados for all kinds of reasons that I will go into. At least I will try to discuss some of them tonight. And if I don't, I would beg your indulgence to continue the discussion on another occasion. But this is an industry that is very important to Barbados, not only economically, but if we look at the aesthetics of this country, you drive around Barbados and you look at the landscape and you look across the valleys and so on, the St. George Valley, and you see the sugar cane, you go into the rural parts of the country. Imagine a Barbados without sugar cane. And, so I asked the question whether promises have been made, and promises. Good night, Tironi. It's good to see you. Loyal member of the opposition and a faithful member, to the shows. But nobody can deny the importance of sugarcane in Barbados and the sugar industry. And we heard a lot. So I think what I want to do is to ask some questions and do a little bit of interrogation of what is going on in the industry, because there are several issues there, and there's been a deafening silence. Certainly this year, as the sugar crop, we started to harvest, and we've seen a number of things happening, and outside of maybe an article or two. So the first thing I want to do before I get into to looking at a couple questions and using the PowerPoint, I just want to ask Dave to show that video that I would have sent him earlier. And this video is one that would have been, it would have been on CBC, a YouTube video on the 5th of January last year. And so if you can play it, Dave, I would be happy for the folks to see a little bit about that, because that forms part of the context in which I will talk about a number of issues related to this industry and the uncertainty or the lack of communication. So is it
Based on recent history, the 2024 sugar harvest is a matter of weeks away. However, so much has happened since the last harvest that there's heightened interest this year. For one, the industry has been privatized, and there are now two companies handling the operations: the Barbados Energy and Sugar Company Limited and the Agricultural Business Company. Lieutenant Colonel Trevor Brown is chairman of both operations. He says the industry has entered a new phase since its divestment and is now in the process of putting everything in place for the crop to start next month. He stopped short of giving specifics.
The 2024 sugar crop is scheduled to start, as usual, sometime in February. And we are well on track with that. But I would go further to suggest to you that the stage we've reached now with the industry, and over the last year, we've done quite extensive investigations and research and planning. And we believe that we're into a new phase in the sugar industry in Barbados that is actually going to be exciting, sustainable, and profitable. We're very, very excited about that. So not only are we confident that the traditional crop is going to start sometime in February, as it normally does, but we see this as the beginning of an interesting new phase for the sugar industry in Barbados.
Lieutenant Colonel Brown also gave a breakdown on the new entity and its operations.
The factory operations will be managed by a new company called BESCO, Barbados Energy and Sugar Company Limited. And the farm operations will be managed by a new company called ABC, the Agricultural Business Company. So those two new companies will take over the operations that formerly were carried out by BAMC.
As the new entity prepares for the start of the 2024 sugar harvest, Lieutenant Colonel Brown says it will be bolstered by new hirings.
One of the things that have impressed us about this and that drives our interest in being involved is the quality of the staff that we've come to interact with, especially at the senior level. It is exciting to work with the kind of people that we've been interacting with. The knowledge that they
pause there, Dave,
case in point, for example.
Position the PowerPoint presentation. Now, this was, as I said, a video that was carried, a YouTube video carried by CBC on January 5th, 2024. And many of us would remember the discussions. And I noted two things as Colonel Brown spoke. He talked about, he stopped short of giving specifics, and he talked about a new phase in excitement. And what I really want to do then is to look, having used that, as I said, as a background, I want to look at this because many of us would have heard a level of excitement, a significant promise, the whole plan to privatize the industry came to the public's attention with some pronouncements by Dr. Clyde Maskell, who I believe is the chairman of, maybe it is the BAMC. That's, as far as I know, I don't know if he still is. I should have checked this afternoon. I didn't get around to verify him, but that was the last thing I knew. He was the chairman. And so if you look at the next slide, I have said that in talking about this, there are a couple critical questions that we need to ask as we try to unravel what is happening here. What exactly did the government promise? The other thing is, of course, why is this offer important? And where are we? When I say we in Barbados, and certainly we who are members of an energy co-op, which was involved in seeking to acquire the industry. And given what we have been hearing or not hearing, where do we go from here? And I think I've shared a couple slides. The next one talks about, and this goes back to 2018, because remember that we're into 2025 now. And so this is not something that turned up overnight. And the first slide is an article, a section of an article from the Nation newspaper on September 15, 2018. And it said, and I'll read what's on the slide. The Barbados government says it's considering merging or partnering the state-owned Barbados Agricultural Management Company Limited, BAMC, with the Barbados Sugar Industry Limited, BSIL, as it seeks to fully privatize the sugarcane industry. Agriculture and Food Security Minister Indar Ware said also Barbadians will have an opportunity to own shares in the newly formed entity, which could come on stream within another 5 years. Ware said the government could no longer subsidize the BAMC to the tune of Barbados 12 million under the current International Monetary Fund arrangement. So clearly part of an agreement that the government made with the IMF was to exit the sugar industry. He went on to say a little bit more, and in terms of what is to happen or what was to happen. Remember, this is a 2018 pronouncement. We are embarking on a system of retooling and empowering, retraining and enfranchising. And I emphasize the whole issue of enfranchising, because we know for many years people have been talking about economic enfranchisement and enfranchising the people, the majority of the population, etc. And it says, and if we are going to do this successfully, then it means that we as a government must pave the way for all of this to take place. And he explained there's no space for any government in this modern time and place where the private sector can perform those duties and do them better. I feel the greater efficiencies, etc. He said that the Barbados now had a sugar industry that was capable of delivering what was needed in terms to build out an industry to contribute. And talked about, and the last sentence says, he cited additional opportunities that will be created through the rebirth of the sugarcane industry, such as entrepreneurs becoming involved in the direct packaging and consumption of sugar, and rum distilleries producing more rum using local inputs. And in terms of the rum distilleries producing more rum using local inputs, one critical input would have to be the production of molasses. So remember, and so the other thing, the next slide, which I think ties in with the notion of enfranchisement, economic enfranchisement, in March 27, 2024, because remember this discussion goes back to early 2018, there was a promise that 11,000 workers in Barbados were to become sugar industry co-workers. And I must tell you, Marcia and our audience, that a number of people were skeptical about it. But I believe that some of us who felt that there was scope to do some of the things that we heard about, retraining and upskilling and all of these things, that in fact, if managed, and I'll look at some of the elements of that later, if we're properly managed, this is a critical sector in our economy. So the pronouncement was that these 11,000 people would become shareholders in a company, so they will be part owners of 20% of the stock of the company. So in essence, when we talk about the workers in the sugar industry, we can ask ourselves, who predominantly are the workers in the sugar industry? And I would say those are the people who slaved in the early days, literally and figuratively, to use the word slave in the sun. We talk about sugar workers, people who, when I was a child, actually manually cut canes and all of those, because they talked about current and past workers. And to me, something like this was attractive if persons who contributed to the survival and the continuity of the industry were part of it. Then that to me was an interesting opportunity. So you had that. And then the next slide is also important, because remember, we're talking about the sugarcane industry. And this slide reminds us that back in 2021, so I go back a little bit in time, part of what was promised, it said government is moving to transition the sugar industry from a bulk sugar production industry to a value chain one, which is with associated benefits for the BAMC and the public as a whole. And it went on to say, reiterating that going forward, the country will no longer be producing only for export. He, meaning the minister, said that the process of transformation had already started, with sugar being produced for domestic consumption. And I want to stick a pin there and say the importance of that. Some of you might remember, and it wasn't used in a complimentary term, when people talked about us having to consume Guatemala sugar when our sugar was exported. But with all the developments in terms of the trade agreements we had with Europe and the changes, what was seen as a problem, well, what was a problem in the sense that we were exporting, getting preferential prices and so on, which at the end, by the time this has happened, that those things had stopped. But we substituted imported sugar for a higher quality locally produced sugar. So in essence, consumers in recent years have been consuming Barbados produced sugar. So sugar was, so there was import substitution, because even though we were sugar producer for many, many decades and a couple hundred years, we were now producing for the local market, so to speak. And the other important line there is the whole question of the production of molasses. And I recall previously talking about this industry, where the point was made that in terms of the authenticity and the branding of our rum and the recognition of the rum as Barbadian rum, we are at a stage, and I don't want to get into all the technicalities of that, but molasses produced in Barbados is going to be a critical ingredient if the rum is to be considered Barbados rum. And over the years, the level of molasses produced for the sugar industry had been declining, and therefore there's an opportunity to increase the production of molasses. And so that was another important element to the changes. So as I say, we were moving from a sugar industry to returning to a sugarcane industry as it used to be in previous times, where the emphasis was not only on producing sugar, but also molasses. And then, of course, there was a discussion about renewable energy. I'm not going to spend too much time on that, because we know the problems that the renewable energy sector have run into. Okay. Now, so in all of that, we have a situation where, and if Dave could perhaps share with us no, it's okay. We can go through the slides because I think I have an extract from here. But if we go to, having said all of that, Marcia and colleagues, the government up to this point in time has not transferred the industry. We heard the optimism of Colonel Brown in the opening video. We heard of the promises made, and what we can do if we look at the next slide, which would lead us into the current situation. Having gone, the comment from the minister, and he said, my view is that when the full transition is completed, for the first time in our entire existence, workers in the sugar industry are becoming owners. A sugar industry with workers becoming owners has to be the real deal. This to my mind represents the greatest piece of enfranchisement to ever take place in this hemisphere. Marcia, you can't want a better promise than that. I was around in the 90s when we had what we call the mutual affair. And that's when Barbadians discovered that the company that is now Sagicor was a mutual insurance company, where in fact the policyholders were shareholders. And there was a big song and dance, and the word economic enfranchisement became the buzzword, and it has stayed around. But in all the talk, there was little evidence of that being done in a way that would embrace significant numbers of people. And here was this opportunity. And if we could go to the words of Ambassador Clyde Maskell, Dr. Maskell, the chair of the Barbados Agriculture Management Company, BAMC, and he said, no one individual can come from any part of Barbados or any part of the world and believe that he or she has the knowledge when the people who actually work in these institutions are the ones with the knowledge and only need guidance. So in essence, part of this whole enfranchisement was not only economic enfranchisement, but it was, I call it technical enfranchisement, that you were using the people who knew the industry to help advise on some of the changes. And I will tell you this, I have been able, as a member of the co-op, I have paid special attention. I have followed some of the people working in the industry, and the belief that some of these current employees have, especially some young ones, who felt that, you know, now this is an opportunity for me to not only be an employee, but to be part of this. And you know, have renewed their efforts to achieve a number of things. So all of this was promised. And lo and behold, as the old people will say, Marcia, come the beginning of 2025, because remember, in 2023, the government its back was against the wall in relation to its promises to the IMF. And so there was this fast tracking of this whole process. And so when I asked about exchanges of information and documentation and the going beyond what I would call verbal promises, it appears as though commitments were made verbally, and the co-op has written, because as I said, I'm a member of that co-op. I believe very strongly in the model, the co-op model, and the large one that we know about is the credit union movement. That's a successful co-op movement in this part of the world. But this, I saw it as an opportunity to do what the credit union as an arm of the co-op movement did in the 80s, because a lot of people may not remember, but it was in the 80s when City of Bridgetown, Barbados Workers Union, Credit Union, UWI Credit Union, and some other credit unions really were formed, or other credit unions came into their own and made the financial co-op sector, the credit union movement, a force to be reckoned with. And I saw a replication of what I was part of back in the 80s as a possibility here. And so, as I said, lo and behold, what we have now is, if you go to the next slide, is a situation. Co-op, it's a slide there, right? Co-op energy. So this comes from an article this year, and it says the 19th of March 2025, co-op energy to pay 16 million investment to facilitate stalled sugar industry transition. And it says here, article by Sharia Brathwaite. Mere weeks into the 2025 sugarcane harvest, uncertainty prevails over the true ownership of Barbados' sugar industry. Barbados today can reveal exclusively. Co-op Energy insisted that the government still controls the industry, but the government maintained that Co-op Energy is in charge, despite failing to meet its end of the divestment bargain. Continuing the next slide, according to Lieutenant Colonel Trevor Brown, head of the Barbados Sustainable Energy Cooperative Society Limited Co-op Energy, the transition of the sugar industry from the state-owned BAMC to Co-op Energy remains incomplete, despite earlier claims suggesting otherwise. And he went on to say, the BAMC is still running it. They haven't handed it over to us, Lieutenant Colonel Brown told Barbados on Tuesday, stating that the Co-op Energy had received no formal communication from the government about the transfer of assets. And I want to say this, Marcia, because as a member of a co-op in Barbados, you have the right to ask for information and explanations. And I made it my business to speak directly to Colonel Brown. And if Colonel Brown does not think that if he hears me and I'm not represented him accurately, he can signal to me either by a WhatsApp message, and I will correct myself. But my understanding is this, because at a meeting of the co-op, I said I made a commitment to the members to personally encourage members of the credit union movement, which, as I said, is a financial co-op, members of the movement, to look favorably on investing in this entity. Because some people would recall that there was a discussion about credit unions as institutions investing, and I myself would have spoken about the limitations of that. Because at the end of the day, a credit union cannot simply take up members' savings and invest without going through a process of approval, starting with the members, taking it to the members and getting approval of the regulators, etc. But I said at a meeting, one of the things you can do is to leverage the membership, the over 100,000 people who are in the credit union movement, to invest in something like this, if, you know, with all of those things. But if I came to you, Marcia, and said, look, I am going to build a complex that I'm going to rent out to small businesses, and part of it will be Airbnb, you know, apartments or something.
Right.
You're going to ask me to show you the numbers. You're going to say to me, show me the math, show me the calculation, show me the details of that. And it is my understanding that in order to sell the project to prospective investors, whether it be credit unions looking to encourage their members to do it, or credit unions seeking to get permission to invest, you needed that information. And it is my understanding, and government can tell us otherwise, and if I have misrepresented what I think I was told, the government is yet to provide Co-op Energy with those details. So in other words, Co-op Energy has not been able to fully do its due diligence and to prepare a prospectus based on information, formal information, etc. And if that is the case, how can you take up $16 million and hand it over to government? So to say that they haven't received it, as far as I know, is correct. But to say why is what we await government to tell us. And I think it is unfortunate, because I think with all that was promised, you know, and I think having shared Colonel Brown's comment. I think I should also share a comment from the minister, where as the last slide
Yes, because we have 3 more minutes.
right. And
Yes.
I would say, as the minister said, all we are waiting for is Core Entry to put in their investment. He told Barbara today. But we have kept our end of the arrangement. That is to provide them with financial information, an MOU and shareholders agreement that they have signed on to. Now, the question is, when they say financial information, have they provided them with the information that they needed and expected and so on? And that is for the decision makers at the co-op to tell us. When pressed on whether Core Energy had been given a deadline, Weir confirmed that the company had signed the shareholders agreement before December 2023 and was expected to make its financial contribution at that time. Now, I don't know what the agreement says, and and this will have to be confirmed. The company repeatedly sought and was granted extensions. Now, my question is why? Because if you granted them, there must be some basis for that.
Yes.
They asked for time and they were given time. My question to the minister and to Colonel Brown is, why did you find it necessary to ask for time? And did the situation change having asked for time? In other words, were you then put in a position based on what it is that necessitated the requirement for additional time? They came down and asked for financial information and they were given financial information. Now, I would need to hear whether or not that financial information was what was required, if that was all that was required, because if you tell me, financial information could be income statement, balance sheets, as you know. But you also have to have things like asset registers and all kinds of things so that you know what it is, and a whole set of information. So I have raised this because at the end of the day, this is a strange situation that you have government entering an arrangement where they have made all kinds of promises that would benefit the average sugar worker. The consultant or the chairman of the BAMC would have done presentations in the public, and certainly would have made presentations to members of the co-op like myself, which made people very interested in the project. And I find it passing strange that this thing has come to a deafening silence. I was going to say a screeching halt. The factory has been operating, sugar has been produced. We've been seeing some interesting pictures and suggestions. But my question is, where are we, and why is it that as at this point in time, we are unable as citizens and taxpayers to know exactly what's going on, and why, importantly, what is what's the next step in this process?
Yes.
Over to you, Marcia.
Yes, thank you, Ms. McClean. Very well presented and very interesting. And, I was saying, if we had resources and had, some young people, they could do a small little documentary on this, because I think it is so important. Sugar, historically, this was our mainstay. And if this is what is happening now, and then to the big question, though, which we can't, I suppose this is something that we will have to depend on you, Ms. McClean, to do a follow-up, because we want to know exactly what is the government planning to do then with the industry. That's the other piece of it, because if they're doing all kinds of things and didn't hand over because it seemed like they had no intentions to, that's my feeling about it. Then what is it that they really want to do? So I think that's a part 2 for you, Ms. McClean.
For sure. And the other thing is, what I will do as a part 2 is to demonstrate that the industry, in essence, will probably go nowhere, because when we talk about agriculture, the relationship between sugarcane production and other agriculture, root crops, etc., there's I call it a symbiotic, almost a very close link between the two, And then, of course, when we talk about our soils, so there are all kinds of critical and necessary and important reasons why sugar cultivation done properly, it's important to our
Yes,
country and so on. So
yes.
I
Well,
I will definitely do that
yes,
and bring some numbers and that kind of thing
yes, yes.
to look at
Excellent work, Miss
contribution.
McClean. Excellent work. And again, we were supposed to do this on Sunday, and then I felt we needed to do something a little more current. But this is good this evening. Thank you so much.
Let me comment about the presence of children. And it's important that children get to see, as in the case here with Trinidad and Barbados, the parliamentary process. But from the time you use red and yellow, those are Barbados Labour Party colors. And it is offensive because you see, but it is tasteless, it's indecent. I saw somebody use that word, inappropriate, wrong. Look at that. Yes, you have the children, and yes, you chose children from the schools. Well, one is the school in his constituency, I think, and then the schools he went to. That's fine. You're introducing, but to put those flags in their hands, it is wrong. And don't tell me about, and I'll tell you this, if as you say, the others had the flag of the country, the flag of the country, the Trinidad and Tobago flag. But it just shows you how the thinking of the persons, and I will say this, the teachers and the principals may be reluctant to say something, or maybe not, because they may be very happy. I don't know who the principal is, so I'm just speaking in generic terms. But the Ministry of Education also should not allow that kind of thing to happen. Chief Education Officer, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Education should provide guidance on these things. It's wrong. Even if they were the colors of the school, I wouldn't use them. I would tell them use the national flag. That argument about that being the school colors is not, that doesn't fly with me. As I said, the exercise is not, when you're going to parliament, you're representing, yes, you have your supporters, but not school children, not primary school children. You get consenting adults who do that, and so they will try to rationalize it and justify it, but it is inappropriate, and it is, you contrast it with Trinidad, as we said, and you see the difference. Let the children go and learn about parliament, not being caught up in partisan political, posturing.
Nonsense.